Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Meantime, the Prime Minister has defended her proposed shake-up of schools, saying her plans to expand grammars are not a return to the 1950s. Theresa May has been accused by the Chief Inspector of Schools of turning back the clock and threatening up to 20 years of progress in the education system.
This is not a proposal to go back to a binary model of grammars and secondary moderns, but to build on our increasingly diverse school system. It is not a proposal to go back to the 1950s, but to look to the future. And that future, I believe, is an exciting one. It is a future in which every child should have access to a good school place, and a future in which Britain's education system shifts decisively to support ordinary working class families. I want this country to be a great meritocracy.
Well, the PM has confirmed that she wants to lift the ban on creating new grammar schools. £50 million a year will be provided to support the expansion of existing ones. Under the proposals, they may have to offer a proportion of places to pupils from poorer families, or open new non-selective or feeder schools in disadvantaged areas. Grammars will also be encouraged to recruit students at 14 and 16 as well as 11 to avoid the danger of children being written off as non-academic at a younger age. Large independent schools will be asked to sponsor or set up a state school, as well as facing a tougher test to maintain their charitable status. Restrictions on faith schools selecting more than half of pupils, according to religion, are to be lifted, paving the way for new Catholic schools. And universities will be required to support the state system by setting up a new free school or sponsoring one. General Secretary of the National Union of Teachers, Kevin Courtney, joining us now. The Prime Minister would say she's doing everything she can to try to make the system fairer.
Well, we can't agree with that. What we're seeing so far seems completely incoherent to us. We've heard this morning that all schools are going to be selective, which makes no sense. We've heard it's an extension of parental choice. And when you have selection, it's not the parents that choose, it's the school that chooses. So the National Union of Teachers agrees with Sir Michael Wilshaw, the head of Ofsted. This would be a backward step. It would lead to lower results overall. It is a throwback to a debate that's 30 years over, really. We have to remember, every time you create a new grammar school, you are turning 3 or 4 of the neighbouring secondary schools into secondary moderns. We have to remember that for every child that is selected, 3 or 4 are rejected, and you know, they take that with them through the rest of their lives. They feel failed by that process, and you will talk to many people failed by the 11 plus. It is a terrible system. We should not go back to it.
OK, although one of the suggestions that we just outlined there as we were introducing you, so was that grammar schools will also be encouraged to recruit students at 14 and 16 as well, so it's not a one-stop shop 11 and you're out.
Every time you select a child, you are rejecting other children, and you're taking them away from you're taking talented children, able children away from the other schools, damaging those schools. These processes don't work. Theresa May really should be required to come up with some evidence that grammar schools work to increase standards overall and increase social mobility, because we have evidence worldwide from the OECD looking at every advanced economy that successful education systems don't do this. They don't do selection. The best education system in Europe, Finland, it's got the highest results, it's got the lowest gap between disadvantaged children and advantaged children. It has no selection. There's no evidence base for this. It wasn't in the Conservatives' election manifesto, which is only a year or so old. So I hope that the House of Lords will feel free to reject this policy. It wasn't in a manifesto, they're not bound by it, and Labour and the Liberal Democrats have a majority. I'd like to say that as well as the National Union of Teachers agreeing with Sir Michael Wilshaw, the head of Ofsted, we also agree with the criticisms that Neil Carmichael, the Conservative head of the Education Select Committee, has raised about these proposals as well. There's no sense to these proposals, no evidence base. We know that in current grammar schools, less than 3% of children are on free school meals, compared with 18% in the population as a whole. We've seen figures recently that show that 4 times as many children in grammar schools were privately educated in prep schools as our free school meals. These are motors of social inequality, and children who are rejected are held back in the rest of their lives by this. It's not a programme for a modern economy or a modern country.
OK, but Mr Courtney, I mean, do you accept that we do need an overhaul of our education system?
We think our schools are doing well in lots of ways. We think there are real problems, and this whole debate about selection is a massive distraction from the real problems our schools face. At the moment, they're facing funding cuts, about 8%, according to the Institute for Fiscal Studies, across the next few years. And that means class sizes are going up in many schools around the country. It means that in many schools, art, dance, drama teachers have been made redundant or not replaced when they've left. And that's depriving children of the opportunities to do those subjects. We know of many schools where teaching assistants are being dismissed, and that's depriving children of chances as well. So that's a real problem that the government should be addressing. There is a huge problem, as we know, with teacher shortages and teacher retention, and the government isn't dealing with those problems.
And we've got a shortage of time, so I'm afraid I'm going to have to cut you off there, Kevin. It's great to talk to you. Come back soon and talk to us again. Thank you very much indeed. Thanks a lot. General Secretary of the National Union of Teachers.
Well, let's get more on all of this with the Guardian columnist, Dawn Foster, and the political editor of the Financial Times, George Parker. Thank you both very much indeed for joining us. Dawn Foster, if I may turn to you first. It's all a bit of a shock, this. It wasn't in the manifesto, was it?
No, it wasn't in the manifesto, and David Cameron made very, very clear in the last government and this one that the Conservatives had put grammar schools behind them. They wouldn't be bringing it back on the table, and partly that's because grammar schools have in the past caused massive economic and social divides, really writing off children at the age of 11. And also, grammar schools just aren't that popular, except amongst a very, very small percentage of people. What parents and the community really, really want are good schools that serve everybody and make sure that every child has the best chance and best education possible.
And George Parker, it's the biggest change in education for many, many years, isn't it? But it's coming from a Prime Minister that doesn't have a mandate.
Yeah, she's in a very unusual situation that she's come in. I noticed actually with David Cameron in his final speech outside Downing Street, he said he was looking forward to Theresa May carrying forward the manifesto that she'd been elected on. I think he had a sense that this was coming, and Theresa May is essentially coming in and running a new administration. But as you say, there's no mandate for this policy. It wasn't in the manifesto. Theresa May's people are saying, well, actually there was a reference in the manifesto to the fact that they would continue to reform education, to deliver the best education to students. But nevertheless, nothing explicitly like this. It won't wash in places like the House of Lords, where I think there's going to be a very hostile response. So she's going to have a difficulty, I think, pushing this through. It's going to be a bitter, protracted fight, I think, in Parliament.
Yeah, as you say, it is going to be tricky to push this through the House of Lords. We know many, many peers are against it. So why is she taking this on? It seems to be a major battle that she may not even win, and it seems to be her first one as well.
It's intriguing, isn't it? She's got Brexit to deal with, and yet she's picking this fight on an issue which divided the Conservative Party when David Cameron was the leader. And in fact, back in 2007, before David Cameron became Prime Minister, it almost destroyed him, you remember, as the party split on grammar schools. So why is she doing it? Well, I think firstly it's to show that she's serious about social mobility. She thinks this is a way of making the economy and society work for everyone. And I think there's also a bit of the fact that she's got political capital now. She's just become Prime Minister. This is the moment when, as a Prime Minister, you have the most capital to spend. I think also there's a subtle differentiation between her and David Cameron. One of the reasons that people think David Cameron was against grammar schools, Tory MPs I'm talking about here, was because they thought, as an old Etonian, he didn't really understand grammar schools and aspiration. And Theresa May, grammar school girl, is keen to draw a line under the Cameron era.
And Dawn Foster, what's so fascinating about this is because it wasn't in the manifesto, it almost gives a bit of a free rein to Tory MPs to come out and criticise it. They haven't just got to keep their mouths shut and get on with it. And we heard from Nicky Morgan today as well.
Yes, I mean, Nicky Morgan was quite quiet as an education minister while she was in the post. I think also we will be seeing, obviously, as George said, the Lords will be very angry. The Tories have a very small majority, so they will have to fight to get this through. But I think we'll see a huge backlash from teachers. Teachers have been really, really weathered by the free school battle, and so far the Conservatives haven't been able to show that they can actually implement new and strange, education policy without angering both teachers and parents. So I think it'll be an uphill battle to do this. And I think George is right when he says that, as Theresa May is a product of a grammar school herself, she sees this as a route to social mobility. The idea that you help a few poor but able people. But actually, when you look at grammar school intakes, they actually tend to take in, the richer, more well-off kind of children in an area, and it just causes wider social divides. So I think actually that argument won't hold very well, and she will have a struggle getting it into legislation.
I mean, you don't think, Dawn, do you, that this could be an excuse to call an early election? There'll be an almighty row, and with Labour in disarray, she'll think, well, actually, this could be the thing that gets that mandate for me.
It could be, but also at the same time, Theresa May was anti-Brexit. There's still a lot of confusion over what she thinks Brexit should be, despite her coming out and saying Brexit is Brexit. So I think calling an early election is something she won't do. It's something she won't risk. I think she's trying instead to kind of put forward her own policies rather than just carrying the mantle of Cameron's policies. She wants to be her own Prime Minister, and part of that involves kind of invoking kind of old guard Tory ideas about social mobility around grammar schools rather than looking at wider equality.
And George Parker, we know that Theresa May herself went to a grammar school. She clearly believes in them. Do you think that they are good for social mobility?
Well, there's certainly plenty of evidence to suggest that they aren't good for social mobility. And you heard Nicky Morgan, the former Education Secretary, talking about the danger of segregation at the age of 11. I think the key for Theresa May is to prove that this is not a return to the past, and that's the message she's going to be taking to some of her rather sceptical MPs. This is not a return to the old days of dividing people up into sheep and goats at the age of 11. This is a new division, but I'm not sure whether that's going to wash. I'm certainly not sure it's going to wash in the House of Lords when it gets there, because the further you move away from the manifesto upon which you're elected, the harder it is to make the case in Parliament, both with your MPs and especially in the upper house.
He's right, Dawn Foster, isn't he? That you can't afford to stray from your manifesto too far.
Yes, completely. And I think that will be Theresa May's problem, because obviously the manifesto wasn't hers, it was David Cameron's. So she has to either implement that or take this big risk with something like grammar schools and try and forge her own way. But then she has to prove that she has the leadership to get her MPs behind her. So that remains to be seen if she can pull that off.
Fascinating. Well, it will be interesting to see how all this pans out. Guardian columnist Dawn Foster and political editor of the Financial Times, George Parker, many thanks indeed for joining us.